Troubled waters in the South China Sea. A tense, hours-long standoff between China and the Philippines unfolded on Saturday near Rengaijiao, a disputed reef in the South China Sea. The China Coast Guard blocked two Philippine Navy vessels from intruding into the adjacent waters of Rengaijiao, known as Ayungin in the Philippines and Second Thomas Shoal internationally. The Philippine ships were delivering construction materials to a broken military vessel which has been grounded on the reef since 1999. The standoff sparked immediate criticisms from the Philippines and the US, which China promptly rejected. So how did a rusty warship ground itself on the reef in the first place? What exactly happened during this standoff over the weekend, and what's the business of the United States in the matter? I'm pleased to be joined from Haikou, Southern China by Dr. Yan Yan, Director of the Research Center of Oceans Law and Policy of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, and from Manila, the Philippines, by Herman, Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. The warmest welcome to both of you. First, Dr. Yan, let me go to you. We have seen footages released by China over the engagement or the standoff between the two sides, and we're seeing water cannons being used by the Chinese side against the Filipino vessels. Exactly why were water cannons used? What happened exactly during the standoff?
Well, actually, before the standoff, I think China has been repeatedly communicating with the Philippine side again and again, trying to stop them from going to do the supply mission, but then they refused to do so. And also, before the water cannon, actually, the Chinese Coast Guard exerted oral warning, and then the Philippine ship insist to go inside and to make the supply, so that China used water cannon. Actually, there are many means of maritime law enforcement, and the using of water cannon is actually one of the mildest means of law enforcement in maritime. And also in China's, in the South China Sea, we see many conflicts in the ocean, and we see that many types of use of force by law enforcement agencies between Vietnam, between Malaysia, and Indonesia.
Why water cannons here? What's the consideration of China? And has there been any personnel damage or any people hurt on both sides?
Yeah, exactly. There's no damage and no casualty during this whole process. And water cannon is actually one of the mildest means of maritime law enforcement. And also the Chinese Coast Guard does not target it at the Philippine vessel itself. Thus, it's a show of China's self-restraint, and just to warn our U.S. our Philippine counterpart and trying to stop them from entering into that area.
Mr. Laurel, what has been the reaction and reportage, first of all, and domestic reaction in the Philippines to the incident?
Well, before that, may I just explain that it's very important for the audience to understand that the disputed area, Rengaijiao or Ayungin Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal, is not disputed only between China and the Philippines, but also Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam. But we have a case of the exercise of sovereignty by China over the area because of its claim, but also now being challenged again by the Philippines. So we have this incident. And so the use of the water cannon in one of the vessels, because the first vessel, I have to correct your report, was allowed to deliver its supply of water and food for humanitarian reasons. And this has been the arrangement for the past many decades, since 1999. So,
yeah, why was the second vessel blocked?
Well, the second vessel is a bigger vessel, and it is assumed that it is carrying construction materials. Now, why is the Philippines desiring to deliver construction materials? Because this is the way the Philippines could reconstruct the sinking vessel that was deliberately grounded by the Philippine government in 1999 to serve as an anchor for its EEZ claim or territorial claim. However, the territorial claim of the Philippines has been negated by its arbitration case in The Hague, and so it's now just the EEZ. Now, it's also important to stress that the territorial claims, not only of China, but also of Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, are superior to the EEZ claims of the Philippines. So, but it's now also important to answer your question, what the role of the Americans have been in this incident.
Help us understand the domestic reaction, if you will, Mr.
Well,
Laurel.
I reviewed the social media responses. Of course, there's an overwhelming emotional reaction to the incident, and this is designed. This is engineered by the American and local operations of the information campaign of the Americans, and of course their pro-American counterparts in the Philippines.
Okay.
But we have had
Yeah.
such incidents in the past, in 2021, water cannon incident also. The tsunami of emotions will pass, and then the normalization will come about again. So,
Dr. Yen, so why did China block, in answering the detail that Mr. Laurel raised, why did China block what it believes to be construction materials needed to repair the grounded military vessel on Rengai Reef?
Well, first of all, I think that the Philippines put that vessel on this Second Thomas Shaw Renaijiao is trying to exert an effective control over the features that are disputed. And also for the past 24 years, I think China has been exercising self-restraint and reached some kind of consensus with the Philippines that for humanitarian reasons to allow the Philippines to ship some necessary food and waters to the people, on the vessel. However, this time I think China trying to block the second supply ship is just because the Philippines is changing the status quo and trying to consolidate the vessel, which it promised to tow away like 20 years ago.
We had some difficulties finding documents supporting, because China does say that the Philippines agreed to tow them away. When did they make that pledge, and why was it never followed through?
Well, China did make a diplomatic protest back in 1999 when we found out that the ship was there in the Renaijiao, and also through diplomatic communications and channels, the Philippines did make several times of commitments that they will tow it away, and that's why we have this kind of reached some kind of consensus to maintain their basic supply, on the ship. Before it will be towed away. And just think about it. If China really wants to stop the necessary and ordinary supply like food and waters, and how can the Philippines station on the ship for 24 years? Thus, I think that China has already exercised the highest level of self-restraint in terms of this incident.
Mr. Laurel, what is the biggest question, on the mind of the Filipino people when it comes to this incident? Is it about, who does the reef belong, or the China use of, water cannon or maritime legal instruments to dispel the Filipino ship? What is the Filipino reaction most strongly about?
well, in fact, I think that there are not enough questions being asked by the ordinary Filipino who are emotionally reacting to this, because they should, if they did, they would find out that it's the Americans engineering this from the very beginning, because the report that was splashed in all the newspapers came from Raymond Powell, an ex-Air Force, U.S. Air Force colonel from the Gordian Knot Institute. And there were 3 U.S. warplanes or monitoring planes overhead while this was going on, and they supplied the video material to the local Philippine media.
Why do you think the United States step up their involvement in the case to stir up the sentiments?
Well, the U.S. and the Philippine Coast Guard are going to start their joint patrols later this year, in the last quarter of the year, probably in November. So this is a preparation towards that, and towards the escalation of the tension with China in the region. This is also a justification, strengthening the justification for the U.S. bases in the Philippines that are being expanded today. So the Americans have the motive to support the Philippines in this challenging of this sovereignty over this area.
The U.S. State Department said in a statement that the U.S. reaffirms an armed attack on Philippine public vessels, aircraft, and armed forces would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments under Article 4 of the 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. Mr. Laurel, once again, does that treaty apply here? Is the United States expecting to ratchet up the response from China so that the U.S. and the Philippines have more excuse to stand together in so-called defense against China?
Well, that is really the strategy of the Americans. And in my clarification and discussion with retired military and naval officers here in the Philippines, they say that the BRP Sierra Madre, the ship that is derelict in the Ayungin Shoal or Rinay Chiao, is still in the active list of the Philippine Navy, and it is still Philippine territory. However, it does not generate territorial rights or such claims. So if it is, but in theory, they say, if it is towed away by China, that would be an act against Philippine territory and the Philippine ship. So that is what is the reason for this insistence on trying to maintain that ship.
Dr. Yen, what is the original agreement between countries in the region to deal with such thorny matter when you have multiple claimants to a certain structure or reef? What has been the way to keep the situation calm?
Well, actually, I wanted to remind everybody of the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties, the DOC. And what is important is that the DOC, Article 5 of the DOC, which says the parties must exercise self-restraint in the conduct of activities that will complicate or escalate disputes. And thus, we think that all of the claimant states in ASEAN, especially South China Sea claimant states, should really exercise self-restraint and trying to not to change the status quo before we reach the final settlement of the dispute.
So what is going to be China's policy when it comes to containing the situation in the region so that, not to give more reasons for the United States and the Philippines to join hands and target China potentially?
I think either China's South China Sea policy or China's proposed means of making the settlement of the dispute is consistent. And also we think that it is very important for all the coastal states, especially the claimant states, to conduct maritime cooperation, also trying to make further the negotiation of the conduct of parties of the conduct of code of conduct in the South China Sea.
Very quickly, well, some in the Philippines based their claim to the islands on the grounds that the reef is very close to the Philippines and that the so-called tribunal in The Hague in 2016 kind of awarded the reef not to China. Can you explain China's counter-arguments very quickly, Dr. Yen?
We must realize that the UNCLOS does not deal with territorial sovereignty dispute. And also, neither contiguity or proximity is the basis for under international law for acquiring territory. Thus, we didn't recognize the Philippines' claim on the Spratly Islands, the Nansha Qundao, and that's from my personal point of view. And also, it has been 7 years since the arbitral ruling came out, and we don't see the settlement of the final dispute. Either the maritime cooperation is moving forward. Thus, I think that it's time for us to think about maritime cooperation for the benefit of all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yen, Director of the Research Center of Oceans Law and Policy of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, and Herman Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, former U.S. President Donald Trump has been indicted for 3 times, and the 4th is coming. How will his cases further ignite divide between Democrats and Republicans? Stay with us.